one and all. Welcome to this edition of Kitz Corner here. Hope you had a good holiday season. We took a little short break here, but we're back. And boy, do we got a doozy for you. So, after showing all the clear evidence, the obvious, out in the open statements that the United States blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline in order to advance the warfare, advance the Russia invasion and the warfare that's going on in Ukraine, and also to disrupt the natural gas flow from Russia so that natural gas companies in the United States could then send its energy supplies to European nations and so on and so forth. It's basically all economic warfare. It was nothing to do with humanitarianism. It has nothing to do with Ukrainians or Russians or anybody whatsoever. It was all for economics. It was all for business, just like every single war imaginable. But even still, with the obvious signs, they're still confused. And by they, I mean the mainstream media. They're still confused and trying to sow what little discourse they have to still try to pin this on Russia. Somehow they're trying to figure out and pinpoint little tidbits of somehow Russia blew up its own pipeline, even though they own that pipeline, they have control of the pipeline, and if they really wanted to, they could have just turned the valve and shut it right off. But somehow the notorious Russia, with their nefarious stuff that's happening, they somehow blew up their own pipeline. But let me just remind people of the key obvious signs that we have shown multiple times, and just to remind people the obvious in the room of how the Nord Stream pipeline was purposely ordered by the United States, the White House, the Joe Biden administration, the intelligence community to blow up, to detonate, and cause this havoc to begin with. So here's Joe Biden, for example, leading that charge.
Let me answer the first question first. If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly? Since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control.
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
I promise we'll be able to do that. I promise that at some point in time, we will put an end to that pipeline. That's Joe Biden saying it right out in the open to all the press, that we were purposely going to do this. But they're still kind of dumbfounded. They still, I don't know, maybe somehow, there's got to be something there. By the way, isn't it just ironic that Joe Biden is the most coherent person when he's doing something evil? You ever notice that? You ever notice that when, it's blowing up a pipeline or getting ready to start an illegal war? He can be the most confident person and, nail every sentence down to the fragment. But when it comes to, what America is, it's it's just kind of it's bizarre. It's bizarre and it's disturbing, really, that he's the most coherent person with the obvious signs of dementia. He's the most coherent person when he's doing something destructive and nefarious and evil and monarchical to that situation. So that's Joe Biden saying this. Here's also Victoria Nuland, who you may recall is the notorious figurehead. She's part of the military apparatus who pretty much sparked this whole conflict with Ukraine and Russia. She was the one that was caught on audio saying that we need to infiltrate, that we need to go after Russia, we need to install ourselves with these neo-Nazis, we need to overthrow the Ukrainian government to have a puppeteer so that, as Adam Schiff said in Congress once, that we fight Russia over there so we don't have to fight over here, which is exactly what we're doing. Exactly what we're doing. It has nothing to do with Ukrainians, nothing to do with humanitarianism, nothing to do with democracy or freedom or any bullshit buzzwords that they continuously spew at you like every single goddamn war. It's all propaganda, it's all BS, it's all economical, and nobody gives a shit about anyone. That's the cold, obvious truth. So here's Victoria Nuland even saying that this will be the end of the pipeline.
With regard to Nord Stream 2, we continue to have very strong and clear conversations with our German allies, and I want to be clear with you today. If Russia invades Ukraine, one way or another, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward.
One way or another. One way or another, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is done. One way or another. So you heard Joe Biden say it. You heard Victoria Nuland say that. You've heard former generals on MSNBC and CNN have said multiple things about it. Here's even Secretary Blinken. Secretary Antony Blinken even admitting to this. And he says that the Nord Stream pipeline bombing offers a tremendous strategic opportunity for years to come. That is what his outcome is when it comes to blowing up this pipeline. And here's the video proof of it.
Ultimately, this is also a tremendous opportunity. It's a tremendous opportunity to once and for all remove the dependence on Russian energy, and thus to take away from Vladimir Putin the weaponization of energy as a means of advancing his imperial designs.
And what's the United States going to do about it? He's going to take the powers away from Putin so they can implement their own powers. Basically, this is the Cold War redo 2.0 over energy. It's all an economic war. It's two superpowers colliding themselves together so that, the United States can pump out its energy infrastructure, somehow crumble Putin, even though Russia is colliding itself with places like China. They're starting their own economic system. Saudi Arabia is also backing Russia. You see other nations that have also aligned themselves to get away from the US dollar, get away from the petrodollar, which is the artificial inflated dollar that the United States uses to prop its economy. And Antony Blinken says that blowing up the pipeline, having a bunch of people freeze to death this coming winter, and having already an energy crisis on top of all this, is a strategic opportunity. Not for you, not for anyone that matters, but it's a strategic opportunity for the military apparatus. Why? So they can continue on this charade of a war. That's all this is. It's strategic opportunity so that the military-industrial complex, along with the intelligence community, and along with big oil tycoons and natural gas buffoons, can go and exploit this further and further and further. As Julian Assange keeps reminding us that these wars are not to be winnable, but to be continuous. The whole purpose of this is not to have a resolution or an outcome or end this conflict. Their whole point is to continue this on as much as possible. And that's what they're trying to do with this. They've seen the obvious signs. We just showed it to you here. But they still want to continue on this obvious charade of a war. And one of the biggest perpetrators is the New York Times, which is why I want to bring this up. So, this is the New York Times doing an investigation on the Nord Stream pipeline. But really, the investigation is more like a conspiracy. The way it's sounding. So, here's the article here. It says, as investigators piece together clues, Russia has quietly taken steps to begin expensive repairs on the giant gas pipeline, complicating theories about who was behind September's sabotage. So, we just showed you the clear, obvious signs of who was at fault on this. We showed you, right in the open, from their lips, out in the open, they admit to it. But they still want to back the claim, somehow dig to the bottom of the barrel, be the ultimate conspiracy theorist, which is laughable because they call people like us conspiracy theorists for trying to figure things out. even though New York Times is peddling the most falsehood lies, they still want to try to pin this on Russia. And I knew this from day one. I couldn't understand that if Russia owned the pipeline, and the minute that the explosion happened and was reported on the news, why would Russia blow up its own infrastructure when they can merely just turn it off? How is it someone like me, a late 20-something-year-old Canadian kid, in his basement on a shoestring podcast show can figure it out, but the New York Times is still trying to change the gears around? They're still confused about it. So the article goes on by saying the Nord Stream attack has been a wartime mystery, prompting finger-pointing and speculation about how, in an era of constant satellite surveillance, in the midst of an energy crisis, and with Europe on alert because of the war in Ukraine, a vessel could creep up and, on a crucial energy conduit, plant a bomb and leave without a trace. And they call us the deranged ones. I find this so hilarious that, I'm the deranged one, you're the deranged one, because we bother to put things together, we bother to, look in and do our own research. And it's exciting to see that New York Times took its own advice by not doing its own research. Because literally all they have to do is do a quick Google search and they realize that the United States purposely blew up the pipeline to advance its own energy needs, advance its own empire and exports. You can clearly see that. The Baltic Sea, it turns out, was a nearly ideal crime scene. Its floor is latticed with telecommunication cables and pipes as hard as been worn and not closely monitored. Ships come and go constantly from the 9 countries bordering the sea, and vessels can easily hide by turning off their tracking responders. The key question is not what kind of surveillance there was, but why the lack of surveillance for this pipeline and other pipelines and electrical cables and all the underwater cables on the seabed, said Nicholas Robach, Deputy Researcher Director at the Swedish Defense Research Agency. The Baltic is also a giant graveyard for unexploited munitions and chemical weapons dumped after the World Wars. Expectations to clear these obstacles are common, yada yada yada. After the blast, Poland and Ukraine openly blamed Russia, but provided no evidence. Isn't it, again, I'm laughing to myself that the New York Times has spent decades and decades and decades and decades of yelling at people like us, common folk, the working class, by being conspiracy theorists, by looking into things. We saw months during the COVID pandemic of don't do your own research, don't clue into things, don't, add things together. Two and two may equal 4, but don't say that out loud. And here they are being conspiracy theorists. They have no evidence, but they solely blame Russia. They point the finger right at Russia for blowing up its own pipeline, which does not make sense even on the surface of it, and yet have no evidence to back that claim, and they're still continuing to do so, even though we just showed you 3 key evidence points, 3 obvious claims of the United States purposely infiltrating and demolishing and exploding the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. This is something we've wanted to do for years, since we knew about a Nord Stream pipeline. After the blast, Poland and Ukraine openly blamed Russia, but provided no evidence. In an interview, Daniel Stilling, Sweden's top counterintelligence official, declined to speculate on a perpetrator, but he placed the Nord Stream attack squarely in the context of increasingly brazen Russian espionage. in the big context of war in Ukraine that is going on, it's very interesting and very serious, he said of the blast, repeatedly emphasizing growing threats from Russia's spycraft and cyber attacks. We have seen increased attacks from Russia for a long time now. So, they're trying to make this into a Russiagate story. They're trying still, again, to make this a Russiagate story. And it's absolutely hilarious that they're still doing this since 2016. Since 2016. And again, this is something they wanted to do for a while now, but the fact that Trump became president, that Hillary Clinton lost to a game show buffoon who didn't really want to be president, then became president because American politics is the joke that it is. It was their perfect opportunity for the intelligence community to decide, hey, we're just going to blame this entire country on the other side of the world for all of our problems. Even if it doesn't make absolutely no sense. Not even on the surface, not even common sense. We're just going to entirely blame this other country just on the factor to propagandize, fearmonger people that will lead us to a conflict like this. Russia, for its part, has blamed Britain, also without any evidence. Russia has a history of using energy to exert influence and has an interest in fracturing alliances within Europe. But the theory that Russia carried out the blast, repeated often by Western officials, has only gotten more complicated. First of all, as opposed to the United States, that uses its dominance and military and occupation and oligarchy and military-industrial complex and intelligence communities to also exert its influence. You know, like how we went over to Iraq and we purposely demolished its entire infrastructure to capture its oil. I'm sure we do it in, the Christian sense, the good-hearted baby Jesus kind of method. I'm sure that's what it was. We didn't capture their oil. We didn't steal. We didn't, kill everybody to steal their oil. We're just reserving it. We're doing the most humanitarian way of handling it. As opposed to Russia. In recent weeks, Nord Stream AG, which is a majority owned by a Kremlin-controlled company, has begun pricing out the cost to repair the pipe and restore gas flow, according to a person briefed who spoke on a coalition of anonymity because he was not authorized to speak in it publicly. One repair estimates that the price starts around $500 million, the person said. Consultants for Russia are now studying how long the damaged pipes can withstand saltwater exposure. The inquiries raised the question of why, if Russia bombed its own pipeline, it would begin the expensive work of repairing them. And my question to these people, whoever wrote these articles, as you're writing this, and as you pose that question yourself, why would that not sink to the back of your head and go, it doesn't make sense that Russia would blow up its own pipeline. It would not make sense. It would not make sense to write up this article. It would not make sense that after the blast, after the obvious evidence that we reported here, why we would still continue on the charade. Why we would still propagandize, fearmonger, and twist the logic around to still put this on Russia. To add more fuel to the already bluested fire of war propaganda. Why would we continue on this charade? But like any good mystery story, oh my god. The sabotage has layers of intricate and multiple players with degrees of motive and ability. Maybe they should have a podcast on this. Maybe this could be a book series on Audible. Who knows? Even the decision by the Swedish government to keep details of its inquiry secret from Western allies has prompted whispered speculation that perhaps investigators have cracked the case and are strategically keeping quiet. Or maybe they just don't have any goddamn evidence, which you just said at the beginning of this article. There is no evidence to back the claim. None. None whatsoever. But you know what we showed you? 3 different examples of U.S. officials saying out in the open, we were going to destroy the pipeline. We said that out in the open. Obvious. Clear sign evidence that we were the perpetrators. But they're still trying to twist the logic and say, well, maybe they're hiding something. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe. Not so, Mr. Stindling said. We have no concrete evidence, he said. But hopefully we will. I also just want to show this too. Where's right here? The first pair, Nord Stream 1. So there's two different pipelines. There's the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. And these are the pipelines that go under the Baltic Sea into European nations to give them natural gas that would, heat their homes and use for energy concerns during winter months and so on and so forth. But here's another key evidence point to point out this. The first pair, Nord Stream 1, came online in 2011. Germany wanted cheap, reliable gas, and Russia wanted to reduce its reliance on piping gas through Ukraine, a country in which it had contentious relationships long before this year's invasion. What we considered before using anonymous sources, do the sources know the information? What's their motivation for telling us that? They have proved reliable in the past. We can collaborate the information. Even with these satisfied, the Times uses anonymous sources at last resort. The reporter, I don't even know what that is. Soon after Nord Stream 1 went online, the Kremlin started pushing for another set of pipes. This second pipeline, known as Nord Stream 2, has been more constituents with most of the European Union and the United States, both under President Barack Obama and President Donald J. Trump, opposing it. So this is how far this goes back. And this also points out that somehow Donald Trump is Putin's puppet. Is completely made up BS that we already know. But this is already a blowback to the New York Times itself by saying this. That Donald Trump was against the pipeline that Vladimir Putin wanted to install so he can send natural gas flow to European nations. Construction finished last September, and as Russian soldiers gathered on the border with Ukraine, Ukrainian officials saw the pipeline as a security threat. If Russian gas suppliers could further bypass Ukraine, the argument went the Kremlin would have no reason not to bomb Ukrainian infrastructure. Last year, Ukrainian energy regulators sent a 13-page letter to Poland as part of a coordinated effort to stop the new pipeline from coming online. Nord Stream 2 will negatively impact on Ukraine's national security, read the letter, which is obtained by the New York Times. The letter also warned of economic consequences for Ukraine, since Russian companies still pay to send gas through Ukrainian pipes. Even after Russia invaded, even after Russia invaded, a Ukrainian government document obtained by the Times showed that Ukraine expected to continue charging Russian companies, including state-owned Gazprom and Rosneft, to transmit gas during the first half of 2022. Under its new contract, Ukraine receives an average of $1 billion a year in transit fees. So the pipelines had no shortage of adversaries. But sabotaging a key piece of energy infrastructure could be considered an act of war. For a European Union or NATO member to carry out it would have significant consequences, shattering trust in two of the most important Western partnerships, and while attacking the pipeline may have made financial sense for Ukraine, particularly in a time of war, it's capable to pull off such a feat is unclear. Ukraine does not have a Baltic port, and it's only known for submarine was captured by Russia in 2014. Many European governments and experts see Moscow as their most likely saboteur. President Vladimir Putin of Russia has used gas as a political lever in the past, and there is no evidence that he saw Europe as... Again, as opposed to the United States. You do realize George W. Bush, when he infiltrated the Middle East and took the Iraqi oil, he worked for many years in the gas industry. That's how he made his career. That's how he made his living. We want to infiltrate Venezuela the minute we heard there was oil sands underneath it. We do devastation all across the world to steal natural resources. So to say that Vladimir Putin's the only... it's so laughable. It's so laughable that they could say this about another country like Russia, but then don't see the obvious signs back here at home. It is utterly amazing, and this shows how propagandized and propped up by the intelligence community the New York Times is, and how they don't even do their own research. They're really taking their advice well. In one Gazprom meeting, an executive dismissed the idea that Europe could lead the Nord Stream pipeline close, wait for another cold winter, and then they'll beg for our gas. One official told colleagues at a meeting with Russia policymakers and business executives last year, according to an attendee. The attendee spoke on the condition of anonymity because he was not authorized to discuss the meeting, but Germany blocked Nord Stream Pipeline 2's launch. So, all this is showing that they're still trying to twist the logic around like a pretzel to find some way to blame this on Putin, even though it does not make any sense whatsoever that Russia would control its own pipeline, built its own pipeline, then use the money to restore that pipeline. Why would it not just shut off from the valve? Why would it spend so much? It does not make any feasible sense whatsoever. But the New York Times, prompted by the establishment, prompted by the White House, prompted up by, the intelligence community, the military-industrial complex, and oil and gas tycoons, they're going to continuously do this. They're going to continuously twist the logic, propagandize, fearmonger, manipulate you, lie to you, smear to you, that somehow Russia blew up its own pipeline. Which even saying it out loud just does not make any sense whatsoever. And here's Glenn Greenwald to also point this out. So Glenn Greenwald states, still can't believe USG and its media allies got people to really believe Russia sabotaged its own pipeline. Even just saying it out loud doesn't even make sense. Russia would blow up its own pipeline. That's ridiculously just on the notion. Sometimes I think they dismantled the dumbest propaganda just as a show of power. And he quotes to the New York Times article, which we said that he quotes that they're paying to cost of repair, and it raises the inquiry why Russia would blow up its own pipeline and then try to spend money to repair the pipeline. I don't know, New York Times. We're not allowed to do our own research. I don't know. I was trying to figure that out for myself. Actually do the own research and actually be a journalist on like you schmucks. But, people like me or Jimmy Dore or any podcaster or Glenn Greenwald or Aaron Mate, any of those people with actual credentials and actually accountability and integrity, they pretty much get smeared out. They pretty much get smeared out, done, dealt, and thrown under the bus. Somehow we're Kremlin puppets and Putin pushers and all this stuff. But it's good to see the New York Times is taking their own advice well by not doing its own research. And here's also this to point out too. So remember Jeffrey Sachs also figured out that it was the United States purposely doing this. And he said this on Bloomberg. And watch the reaction that Bloomberg has when Jeffrey Sachs, a well-known economic advisor, went to Columbia University, he's a professor of economics, clearly states the obvious signs that this definitely points in the direction of U.S. meddling. And Bloomberg has as he fit.
Now, to make it definitive, the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline, which I I would bet was a U.S. action, perhaps U.S. and Poland. This is
All right, Jeff,
speculation.
we got to stop there. That's quite a statement as well. Why do you feel
Absolutely.
that was a U.S. action? What?
That's quite an action there. That's quite something. That you, with your facts and your evidence and your points and your date, why would you believe that the United States, so heavily hearted and cares so much about the planet and people, why would we want to blow up a pipeline, even though Joe Biden said clearly and Victoria Nuland and Anthony Blinken said it was be an opportunity? Why would the United States care so much about the energy infrastructure of the world? Why would it want to exploit energy for itself? As it's still hilarious that Bloomberg's having a hissy fit, and it goes to show you how American journalism is just so ridiculous that someone like me, just a late 20-something-year-old Canadian kid in his basement on a shoestring budget podcast, is able to connect the dots together. Why? Because I'm not paid by these schmucks. I'm not paid by a billionaire. I'm not, paid to shill for oil companies. I'm not paid to shill for the intelligence community. I'm not paid to shill for the military-industrial complex. I'm not paid to shill for, the sponsors. I'm actually able to do journalism because I have a brain, I have a working conscience, I have integrity, and I want to figure things out. I want to actually do my own research, because doing your own research makes you kind of smarter. It makes you more knowledgeable. And you know that saying goes, knowledge is power? Yeah. But anyway, let's watch the rest of
What
this.
evidence do you have of that?
Well, first of all, there's direct radar evidence that U.S. Helicopters, military helicopters that are normally based in Gdansk, were circling over this area. We also had the threats from the United States earlier in this year that one way or another, we are going to end Nord Stream. We also have a remarkable...
And yet the New York Times could not figure out how? Why? I mean, we still don't know who blew up this pipeline. I don't think we'll ever know. I think it's just going to be one of those locked away conspiracies, and we're never going to figure it out. We're not as curious as people should be. Just go back and do your crossword, and don't do your own research. I mean, we showed you the obvious signs, and they were obvious. You could simply just do a Google search. Go on Google right now and type in Nord Stream 2 pipeline, United States threats, and you can see right in the open. Joe Biden has said it. Victoria Nuland has said it, and Anthony Blinken has said it. Other officials have said it. Like it's common. It's not anything shocking that the United States would purposely blow up a pipeline to infiltrate its own resources and exploit other countries. Like, we've done it for centuries. We've done it for years. We've done it for decades. That's one of the reasons why the United States claims itself as a superpower. And now the empire's collapsing within itself. And that's why the New York Times has to do this bogus reporting of turning this into a stellar mystery series on how exactly the pipeline exploded, even though everybody knows the goddamn obvious, including Jeffrey Sachs, a well-known professor of economics, and Bloomberg just having a heyday over it. Is so laughable. And here's also Aaron Mate. Aaron Mate, I had to leave this because you gotta leave the best for last. Aaron Mate says the latest dispatch in a fascinating new establishment media series. I can't believe it's not Russia. Oh my God. That's hilarious. That's hilarious. Aaron Mate, ladies and gentlemen. We got sooner or later, I'm gonna actually have interviews on this show, and I gotta get him on because that's funny. That's funny. He's a good journalist, good guy, and can crack a joke, and that's why I saved the best for last, because that's definitely the zinger of all this. The New York Times still can't figure out how they can't blame Russia on this. And we've done it. We've shown obvious signs that the United States was involved in this. The United States purposely wanted to do this. There's documents, there's evidence, there's word of mouth, there's video clips we just showed you there. It is all out in the open. And it seems very common sense that the United States purposely did that. But the New York Times, because it's paid by oligarchs, it's paid by the White House and propped up by the intelligence community, the military industrial complex and stuff like that. They're still gonna make this into a mystery series. They're still gonna try to spin this around because they won't hold themselves accountable. They won't hold themselves accountable. Just they can't believe it's not Russia.